Hi, I'm Thilo, and this is Thilo's Theology Service.
Okay, so now tell us a little bit about you're going into college now and you're going through these. As I understand, you went into higher education as well.
That's correct.
So why don't you walk us through a little bit of how, as you continued into college in Lutheranism, starting to have troubles with that, and how these interplayed your studies at the university with your movement toward Orthodoxy.
Right. So really, in undergraduate, Thomas Aquinas College is really where I was exposed to Orthodoxy. Started studying the Church Fathers. In fact, I attended my first liturgies when I was...
Did you have faculty that were Orthodox then?
No. There were students that were Orthodox, just a handful, and there was a local priest who was actually part of one of the philosophy groups down here when we were doing apologetics and stuff like that. So I'd known him before all this. And he had a little parish in Oxnard, California. And so I remember I used to tell the Roman Catholics, look, if there's going to be any converting going on from Protestants to something, it's going to be to the Orthodox. I always knew that, but I still was trying to figure this out. And so that was really kind of my first experiences going to liturgy, but I wasn't ready, either intellectually to understand what Orthodoxy, let alone spiritually. And to come into Orthodoxy requires a certain level of humility.
Just to walk
it's not
in.
an intellectual assent that I'll just study this and figure this out. And
My wife and I, as evangelicals, we were like the golden kids.
Yeah.
We were like, the go-to people for theological question apologetics. Like we were the, AP students. We get to Orthodoxy and it's like, it's like we're like finding out we were in the special ed class. It's like, I thought I was so brilliant here. Oh my gosh, you're just at the beginning. There's so much.
It's just so different too. And so after I completed, 4 years of undergraduate and got my BA in classical liberal arts, then I went to grad school in philosophy in Dublin, Ireland, University College Dublin, Ireland, which is also combined with Trinity College, that most people are familiar with when they hear about Ireland.
Were you able to learn the language?
Yeah. It's not. It turns out that Irish Gaelic is not phonetic. Yeah, it's really hard to.
Yeah.
So, and I went with somebody from undergraduate too. So, and we knocked the master's out in a year. Wrote a dissertation, defended it, and then I applied for the PhD program.
They're in Dublin also?
In Dublin. So I knocked the PhD out in 6 years, which the average in humanities is about 7 years. So that's, I had married my wife, let's see, maybe my first or second year of my PhD. Moved her out after she graduated law school. I moved her out with me to have her do another degree in law. I'm like, honey, might as well.
So she pursued an actual career.
Yeah.
While you were studying philosophy.
The problem was that she had a spinal cord injury and became permanently disabled. And
Wow.
So each year we had to kind of withdraw, and I kept having hope that, okay, this year will be the year, she'll be better, and really what I was doing is that, I thought I was having faith in God, but it was on my terms. But God, you couldn't let this happen. You're just, this is the way it's going to...
in God producing a given outcome.
Right.
Which is not the same as faith in
not.
God. But it is, in our evangelical background, very common.
Right.
Our understanding of faith in God is faith in God to do X.
Yeah, what I expect you to do is be in God, right?
Yeah. And what I not unreasonably, I think, expect would be the best outcome according to my thinking, because my thinking is much smaller.
That's right. And so the PhD, I spent a total 7 years in Ireland, in Dublin. My wife, like 5 years after we'd married, I moved her out, and those last 5 years were some of the darkest and most difficult times of my life. You know, I was working 3 jobs, taking out enormous student loans to pay for her operations. She was dying.
Wow.
And taking care of her while writing a dissertation, teaching classes, and rushing her to the hospital.
Oh my goodness.
It is literally a miracle that I even completed the PhD, because the first book that I opened when I got in the PhD program, how to write a PhD dissertation, it said 85% will never ever complete a PhD who enroll. I'm like, oh, those are good odds. Like, that's a
Wow.
crushing thing to start off with.
Wow.
Because things in life happen, and life did happen at the very kind of most difficult. So PhDs in themselves are already difficult. Most people don't finish them. Add all that, obviously, like, God was with me, and had a plan for our lives, and was using that suffering to basically, cure me and heal me, primarily my pride. Because when you're broken, you realize, I can't rely on myself. I made an absolute mess of my life, and I don't know what's going on. I don't know what goals, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. And that sort of surrendering is exactly what God wants.
See, this is something that I just continuously am trying to draw out through osmosis from my Coptic community. Because, as I often say, the problem with me and my faith is that I'm too powerful. I mean, I'm a 6 foot 240 tattoo sleeve biker, pretty powerful. I'm in America, where I have recourse to civil law, criminal law. I mean, I have so much power, but this little old Egyptian from a village, in a very hostile country, where they can come in and take your property. They can come in and persecute you at any time, and you have really no recourse.
Right.
When this happens. That person has a genuine humility. And it's because they know they don't have power.
That's right.
And us, we have so much that it takes so much to break us of that illusion that we have power.
That's
Because
right.
it's like we forget that, you drove over here today, you were an intersection away from being T-boned in your meeting with God. And you never think about it. And we don't realize it, and we don't acknowledge it. And we live our lives as though we were in control of everything. And really, this is what I'm, hoping more and more to draw out from the Coptic community, especially I love the ethnic parish with the Coptic elders, that they have that spirit with, the Copts have this thing where we kiss both sides of the hand. Whenever we say thanks or thanksgiving, we do this. And we have an actual Thanksgiving prayer that leads, it's right at the beginning, near the beginning of every liturgy at Bea Hour. And we say, we thank you for every condition, concerning every condition, and in every condition. And these Coptic elders mean it. That, this is part of all Orthodoxy. It comes out of the deserts, right? That when the harsh things come, when the trials, when the difficulties, those are there to build you in your faith
Right.
and relationship with God. But since we don't have it imposed on us, it's so much harder for us in these lands of freedom and in these lands of prosperity to understand what that is and to learn to live in that kind of humility.
Yeah, you become self-reliant. When you get everything that you want, you're often very far away from God, because
You're self-directed.
I'm my own God. I don't need. So I don't regret. It was a beautiful thing. It's not that suffering in itself is a good thing, but that God can take something so awful and redeem it into something so beautiful.
Look at the Old Testament. Wherever suffering is mentioned, it's in a negative sense. But in the New Testament, every time they talk about suffering, it's in a positive sense. Something happened to suffering
Yeah.
with
it was
Christ.
transformed.
Exactly.
was
When it was united to Christ, when it became part of Him.
And the worst is death. The worst of suffering, the worst enemy is death, and it's transformed.
Completely.
It's totally. And so I needed that, and I praise God because that was what was going to allow me to. Because intellectualism is only going to take you so far. That I was studying more
And it's
Orthodoxy.
important.
Yeah.
I mean, it's important.
Yeah,
to
we don't
have
want you to
your-
be fideist or something, but like,
Yeah.
I'll just believe. I don't need to ever read or learn.
to have correct
catechesis. Yeah.
thoughts and beliefs are important, but they're not sufficient.
That's right. That's a good way of putting it. And so when I came back from Ireland to the United States, I had nothing. I had no money. I was what would appear to be infinitely in debt from student loans, no place to live, no car, and there was nothing left of me, and that's where God could begin to work. Because I was my worst enemy.
I want to pause right here because people will hear something like this, and people can hear these kind of things that you're talking about, these stories, from people who are now on the other side, what they used to call in the evangelical world where I was, the hallelujah side of obedience.
Oh.
So like, the trials are over and
Yeah,
now I can
right.
give my testimony, and you hear these kind of things from people in that case, but you're still in the midst of it.
Oh, yeah.
You're still living right in the middle of it, saying it.
Yeah.
This is what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah, that's right. It's not like I'm free from... And, God will be gracious and give you a little break.
Yes,
from allowing the suffering.
a breather.
Often I get a little bit nervous when that happens because I know what's going to come.
Oh
Like,
my
it's only going
gosh.
to last for a little while.
Do you get nervous going into Lent? Here we are about to go into
Yeah,
Lent. Do you
yeah,
get nervous
that's
because you know it's
exactly-
coming?
That's
Like
exactly
it was
it.
so funny because this was something I didn't know about, and when I first walked into a Coptic parish, which was any Orthodox church, was a Coptic parish, never even met a Copt. It was during a Lent, and I didn't know. I had no idea. And 2 weeks after walking in the door, I lost my job of 28 years, and we lived on the lot. And Father Dan just said, yeah, this is kind of common for Lent. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And I found this is common Orthodox experience during Lent.
Oh, yeah, I just talk to everybody in Lent. It surprised me more when somebody's like, I'm having a great Lent, things don't, and I'm like, something's up. You better go talk to your priest.
Right? Yeah, right? Absolutely.
That doesn't sound right. And it's the same with like conversion too. There's been a lot of converts and people have helped to convert to Orthodoxy, and sometimes I feel bad because I'm like, you don't even know what's gonna happen, right?
Yeah.
And it happens every
and you don't
time.
want to ruin the honeymoon.
No,
You
that's
know,
right.
just enjoy. Like you're having these wonderful experiences. God bless you. Enjoy. And I'm not even going to tell you what's coming.
And that's one thing that I realized that, I had temptations when I was a Protestant and I sinned, but there was no struggle. There was no fight. In fact, we're told in our baptism, you're telling the demons, game on, let's go, battle begin. And it's true. Everybody that converts, they will come and...
Well, but there's no urgency to the battle if
Yeah, that's right.
I'm spiritually perfect
That's
on the
right.
day of my baptism, and that never changes.
Right.
Regardless of my actual state. I could be backsliding into adultery, but my spiritual for perfection...
The contract's already signed, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And now, if you move into some more Armenian thought, at some point I can, quote, lose my salvation, speaking as though it's a commodity.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, in the midst of it, if I still have a conviction, if I still love God, well, then I'm still saved. And so there isn't the urgency, the sense of urgency to do the corrective.
That's right. And, coming back to the question of these words they might be the same words, they mean something in different paradigms and religions and faiths, that what we mean by salvation as Orthodox is not a contract. In fact, we're given marriage as an example of what salvation is. And come back, we're the first ones that have... you don't have a monopoly on personal relationships.
We don't declare...
what we have.
We don't declare the winner at the starting gun.
Yeah.
It's like, no, this was the beginning of the race. We don't declare the winner.
Yeah, can you
We're not at the
imagine?
end.
Can you imagine saying that when you marry? Thank God that's over. All done. Don't need to work at this, and I don't even have to worry if this thing will never fall
No,
apart.
I know when I die, I'm going to be married to her.
That's it's a really incorrect way and destructive too. You're never going to, because most of the people that I know that are still in evangelicalism, well, one of two things. either they just don't see any need for church. It's like, well, why do I need a corporate body with I can just read my Bible. I'm a Christian, but Tertullian said one Christian is no Christian. And second of all, if they didn't go that route, then I look and they're in the same place. There's no spiritual advancement. And I'm not saying that the heart, and this is one thing that I realized, is that it wasn't as if my heart and intention as far as the thing that I desired changed. I've always desired Christ and the Holy Trinity.
But when we look at spiritual advancement as we really understand it more as a movement in the state of being of a person, rather than even within, there's the concept of sanctification in the Western concept, but it's really more of moral terms, doing more good things and less bad things.
Right.
But we really understand it more as an inner state of being. Yes, an ontological change.
And anthropological. They don't have a concept that we're trying to be like God, in as much as possible.
Yes.
And so I felt that when I converted to Orthodoxy, again, it wasn't that my telos had changed and my desire and intention of what I wanted, but I felt that I didn't have the kind of conceptual hardware to run the software of my desire of God. And then all of a sudden I was given all these tools and traditions and it changed really fast. And I was like, it works. The program works.
But my wife likens it to her pursuit. My wife, throughout, she was a Christian since she was like 5. And she was the only one in the family that would go to church, at 5, and she would always have these issues like, this doesn't seem right. It seems like it should be this way. Always was having this. She used to cover her head secretly in the evangelical church. So because they would chew you out for covering your head, for being pharisaical, legalistic. When everybody closed their eyes to pray, she'd wear a scarf. And then she'd pull it over her head and then pray. And then as soon as the prayer was over, she'd slip it down. And no one could see and no one would notice. And this way, because she always had these sense of things. So when she found Orthodoxy, it was like it validated so many things that she had sensed. But she says, it's funny, she says, I feel like the dog who was chasing a car and the car stopped. Now what do I do with it? Because, now you were validated, this is it. Now you have all these tools, and now you have this, oh, wow. I can't begin to measure up and live. I can't even begin to understand all these tools in the toolbox. And now you have a process where if you went and lived in a desert with no distractions and devoted the rest of your life, you might absorb a fourth of it,
Tiny fraction of the... And so, the conversion came from, that was kind of preparing the soil. And there were parts that were important too, studying about what the faith was. I still had questions. It wasn't like I was sold on... I was getting more towards the end before my conversion, more liturgical. In fact, I would often say that I was Lutheran in my theology, but I would go to Anglican for liturgy, right? Because I was like, oh, they got the liturgy of St. James, unlike French fries and ketchup or whatever God knows they're going to introduce into next.
Grape juice and goldfish crackers.
That's right. That I had a deep desire for liturgy, so obviously I was kind of moving in the right direction, but there was also this kind of tremendous fear that I felt like I was alone assembling what the correct theology, and I'm like, this is so complicated. If this is the correct way, nobody can be expected to go through this individually and figure this out.
You're working on your PhD. What's the laity to do?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm, I'm like, if I'm not even sure what I'm doing, then somebody who, isn't trained in philosophy or theology, there's no way they could put this together. And then a tremendous fear, just being paralyzed that, well, people's salvation might be dependent upon me. My wife's salvation, what if I don't want this responsibility. I don't want the responsibility of knowing, constructing what a correct theology is from myself as the starting point. And it's not we're saying that the individual is never involved in a center or anything like that, But it was all placed on me outside of the historical
But
tradition.
you're placed in front of a buffet court, right?
That's right. And I'm like, well, that looks good. And if I do this, it'll answer that problem. But we got to have some of this liturgy over here. That sounds real good. And, you know, it's got to be sacramental, real presence. Give me some of that. It just was overwhelming. So here begins the crisis. Which crisis comes judgment, right? That you're going to have to be forced to make a judgment. And then I was invited to a liturgy when I was back, and I had a mystical experience. That kind of sealed the deal. Now, what was
Isn't that just ironic that, you know,
Yeah.
you go through all these intellectual endeavors and it comes down to a mixed mystical experience?
Yep. Because I was losing faith in my own intellectual abilities. Lean not on your own understanding. And so what's funny, though, is my wife must have been getting so frustrated at me. She's like, oh, thought we're Lutheran, now we're Anglo-Lutherans, and now we're going to be Orthodox. This is ridiculous. Stop the madness.
Anglo-Lutherdox.
Yeah, Anglo, just this crazy hybrid of, you know.
Here comes a new denomination.
Yeah, she's probably thinking like, oh my gosh, he's going to start his own cult. And then we're going to go down like Jimmy Jones. And so she said out the door that day, she stayed home. She was still disabled, permanently disabled. And she said to me, we're not converting to Orthodoxy. I like where we're at. We're staying where we're at. I'm comfortable with. I said, hey, we had talked about any converting. I didn't say that. I'm just going to look at something. Check it out. Why is that a wrong thing?
Those are the most famous last words of every Orthodox convert. We just went there to learn about the early church, to supplement our understanding, and take it back with us.
And they're gone.
Father Daniel, he has this cute where he points with his finger kind of bent. And you know, we told him, you know, we're just here. We're not looking to convert. We're just here to kind of pick up some things and be careful. There are a lot of people who have come just to learn things and end up Orthodox, and we like, how cute is he?
Yeah.
You know, no, we're not. No,
that's not going to happen. And I didn't know how to process. The only way I could explain it is that it was like a life review. It didn't seem, and it wasn't necessarily visual, but because we're physical beings, I have to kind of describe it in kind of pictures. But it was noetic. It was a type of noetic experience.
Tell people what noetic is.
So it comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means a knowledge. It's a type of like true gnosis.
The noetic faculty.
Yeah, the noetic faculty. So the West doesn't have this. Typically in the West, you know, you could either have some type of substance dualism or hylomorphic, but what it boils down to, it's always kind of a dualistic mind and body. However you want to flesh that out. The anthropology of the West is usually intellect, right? They believe in soul, but soul's the highest faculty of the soul is the intellect, and then body. In the East, we believe in a kind of tripartite understanding of man. So we have the body, we have the mind, and then the heart. And I don't mean like a physical
Not
heart
the blood
organ.
pump.
Yeah. But this is the spiritual organ that connects us to God. It's not the mind that connects us to God. In fact, usually the mind...
Would you say primarily then? Because there is
yeah,
an
exactly. There's supposed to be
connection.
a proper order. Yeah, it's not that you can't talk about God using concepts, but that the primary mode of communication is not necessarily intellectual.
Not anti-intellectual.
It's not an anti-intellectual. It's to bring the intellect into a proper ordering. So it's under the heart.
You know,
not
this is
above the
something I
heart.
think that's important. So there is the direct experience of God, which we're talking about here. But the moment I've had that experience with God, and then I turn to you, and I start to talk about it,
Yeah.
I've now entered the intellectual arena.
That's right.
And so I think it's important to remember that even if somebody is very, very, what we would call spiritual,
Right.
very connected to God, that doesn't mean that the teaching is necessarily correct. because not by that simple virtue alone.
Right.
Because once you speak, you enter an intellectual arena, and that has its own framework, its own rules, its own laws around the intellectual
And you can end up making
communication.
the intellectual then go over your direct experience with God, and then, well, I've got to interpret it this way, right? And then that's when you start getting bad theology.
Oh, yes. Or even if you don't even necessarily move into there is interpretation, of course, because it's a non-intellectual encounter. But even if we try to just describe it, we're already entering into some form of interpretation and definitely entering into the intellectual arena.
Yeah.
So it's not to discount it, it's simply to say that,
Qualify it.
yes, we have to understand the different roles.
Yeah. And so I have to kind of put it almost like metaphorically. I can put it in kind of metaphorical terms, what we'll call the intellect and concepts, to help explain what could not be put into concepts. But it was something like, a life review you think of chronologically. But this was almost presented as a whole, like a whole view, which is exactly the way God views us. He doesn't view you as Thilo, past, present, and future, but as a whole being, not divided in this sense. And so the vision itself kind of came, this noetic vision that wasn't visual, but it was spoken straight to what we would say the nous, which is the Greek word for mind, but the fathers gave a new meaning to it.
Well, it depends on which breakup we use, you know, because we
can still use nous as mind.
The body, soul, or body, soul, spirit, whichever, because all the constructs are valid. It's just understanding what we mean when we speak of them.
Right. So this was given directly to my, noetic faculty. And all the things that I thought either I had orchestrated or coincidental things, I was seeing a type of symphony, a kind of dance that although I was freely choosing these things, God was also reacting to those and guiding me to certain goals. And that it was completed and ordered as if my whole life was meant to come through the liturgy
Kind of like
doors.
all the gears.
Everything clicked. And it reminds me of like...
And so I think it's important to note. So then there's this non-rational, noetic experience of God. But when it happens, it clicks to all the rational, intellectual other aspects, and they all line up into one integrated order.
So do you see that I was compartmentalized? I couldn't integrate. I couldn't integrate my theology. I couldn't integrate any aspects of my life.
This is great.
I was truly the postmodern, right? Everything was broken up into pieces, right? I'd taken the watch apart and I'm like, I don't know how to put it back together on all the blueprints for...
Did you ever hear Ravi Zacharias talk about visiting that first museum of postmodern art?
No.
Oh my God, it was a great story. So they were all excited to take him to this museum, and they show him, and there's like, staircase that goes nowhere, partial walls, nothing interconnected, all individual things with no... And Ravi says, so I turned to the person who brought me, this person was so proud of this museum they had made, and he said, I just have one question. Did you do this with the foundation of the building?
Oh, nice.
You can't.
Yeah.
They didn't. You can't. The building wouldn't have stood.
Wow. That's interesting. So, yeah, that was kind of like the light that put all the fragmented pieces together. That I felt like I was, if I could speak metaphorically, I'd been going around the dark with a candle, which is part of the light of God. And that experience was like going into the sunlight, it wasn't as if my intellect, the light of the candle, was made useless. It was completed and absorbed into its source, its wholeness, and everything then shone with light, and everything was connected from a God's eye point of view and not my point of view.
Had you not taken the journey
right
on the path that you took,
right,
somebody comes to you with intellectual, philosophical, apologetics questions. That noetic experience is a non-transferable commodity. Mm-hmm. That's for you. You can't give me that.
Yeah, I can't, yeah.
But by doing it the way you did and the road you did, you now have something that can guide and help others to come to the place of experiencing.
Right. And so I didn't know what to do because I'm like, I just had this experience. And what did my wife say? We're not converting to Orthodox. I didn't even know how to process. I swear I felt like I was hit in the back of the head with a shovel, that I was disoriented. I was actually kind of scared
Yeah.
that something just happened to me and I need to talk to somebody. And I knew it was related to the suffering. I knew something had happened because I'd seen that the suffering was part of that story. But I was still having to, after the experience, I was having a difficult time processing the information of what just happened to me and what I'm supposed to do with that. And so I had grabbed somebody and I said, look, I told them the story about what's going on with my wife, and they were going through tremendous suffering. And I just had this mystical, noetic experience. And now I got to go back to my wife who told me we're not converting to Orthodox. And I was like, she's going to know something happened to me. Like, it's like if when you're a kid and you did something bad, your parents knew. Like, what were you up to, right? I'm like, this is going to happen. I'm going to come home. You have one of those wives too?
Like immediately just looks at you and knows? Yeah, I have one of those.
You got into something, didn't you? I swear.
I could get away with I don't even try. It's in the forefront of my thinking. Like, I'll get caught no matter what I try. Don't even think about it. She'll know.
So I got caught going to liturgy. I confess. You got me out with the liturgy. And so, sure enough, I came back home. And by the way, I'd asked somebody at the parish, like, what am I going to say to my wife? They said, don't say anything, just love her. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time. My stupid words, once again, it ends up proving not to be stupid at all. So I go back, and my wife immediately said, what in the heck? She's like, look at yourself. What happened to you? And I'm like, so she even is like, I look different. Like something.
My wife and my family, it was a little more obvious in my case. Like my employees, my family, my wife, like, why aren't you cussing all the time?
Yeah.
Why aren't you dropping an F-bomb every third word? And, my employees, why aren't you yelling at everybody? Why are you so peaceful? What's going on?
Yeah. And so I said, I know I'm a professional philosopher, and I spent my whole life training how to take really difficult, lofty ideas into like simple words that people can understand. And I said, the first time in my life, I'm actually just silenced. I'm like, I cannot even begin to attempt to explain to you what. And then something strange started happening. She started becoming very emotional. So we Orthodox aren't against emotions. And then
I'm in the Coptic Church. Egyptians, emotions, no problem.
And she started crying, and then I started crying. I'm like, okay, now I'm getting this weird feeling I'm losing control. I don't know what's happening to me right now, but something was happening. And I remembered what the person said at the parish, don't say anything to your wife, just love her. And so I loved her. I hugged her, and I said, I don't know how to explain this, but I know I'm dedicated to loving you more and more. Each and every single day, that this is what this is going to mean. That was the first thing in my mind. I'm like, oh, this is what this means. And her response was, I want to convert. I want to come home to the Church of the Apostles. Now, she didn't know that was like a common phrase. I was like, what did you just say? I hadn't even made up my mind.
Oh my gosh. And she hadn't been?
She hadn't even been. Something was carried on. And she actually said there was stuff glowing off of me. She said I had, and I don't mean like Hollywood, like light, but there was a type of a glow, like something had changed with me.
Wow.
There were divine energies being carried from the liturgy back to that were contagious and went on to my wife, changed her, and then in unison, since I hadn't even made up my mind how to process information or what to do, we had both said, that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, that's a rare thing because oftentimes with people that convert, the spouses or the husband, they may not join at the same time. And that it can be difficult for people.
Well, it's in the Coptic world, it's almost unheard of to see a couple convert.
Yeah.
Convert. It's, somebody marries an Egyptian.
Yeah.
To see a couple convert together is very rare.
So that's where it began, and then the miracles really started, and it was almost too fat. Like I just couldn't believe it. I was like, "There's too many. This is just." Now, when I first came into Orthodoxy, a lot of people asked me this: so you just bought it hook, line, and sinker? And intellectually, I didn't. I still had various issues. For Protestants, the notion of iconography was a bit weird.
Oh, of course.
I don't think
Beyond weird, it's idolatry.
Yeah, and I wasn't at that point, but
you had a familiarization, though, with when you were connected to the road of Lutheranism and Anglicanism.
Yeah,
you're getting really
exposed.
Close to.
Yes.
So a lot of those issues fall away.
So that wasn't the main issue, is having icons. It was when there was talk about that there's actually some type of ontological union between the prototype, the saint or Christ, and the image, such that we can actually communicate. I was like, okay, that's getting weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
That seemed
That's
weird. I'm
moving
like,
into
religious
idolatry.
art's one thing.
Yeah.
But you're telling me these are windows into heaven and that they're ontologically united in some mystical way. Like, I don't know about that. There were some issues with Mary, exactly what
we
her
all have
role.
those.
But they went away fast. It wasn't a big deal. And I mean, it's strange if we're think about it. If, like, I'm not gonna buy a system unless I check off every single thing. And like, who does stuff like that?
Yeah.
At some point, it's like, I don't know. I don't really trust my own abilities. But I really kind of like, where else am I going to go? Like, everything else is ridiculous.
Yes.
like, I'm just going to put my faith in. I'll figure this stuff out later, right? It's kind of...
Yeah, I kind of had to come to the place where, for me, it wasn't that I settled every one of those issues completely in my mind. Mm-hmm. But it was when I came to the place of saying, if the church has said it is so, if I don't agree with it in my mind's the problem.
Yeah.
Because I know that this is what's true. If I don't have an internal witness of what's true, that doesn't change the truth of it.
Right.
You know, there were people in the 60s who had an absolute internal witness that they could fly when they were on LSD, and they died.
Turns out it was a bad idea.
Yeah, they died. So, you know, my affirming something is true or not is not the basis for it being true. It's true whether I affirm it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was like, to me, I keep saying that this is when a person becomes orthodox in their heart, is when they come down from the place of judgment over the church, where we all have to start. We all have to start judging the church. She wants you to give your life to her.
Right.
You better be judging her. But it's when you come to the place where you find she's trustworthy.
Right.
And you're ready to now come down from that seat and sit at her feet. And you say, if I'm not on the same page with you, and when I'm talking about the church, I'm not talking about this parish or this jurisdiction in the last 20 years. I'm talking the historical church. If I'm not in line with something the historical church has passed down, well, I'm the problem. It's a given. I'm the one that has the problem.
I mean, this is even true within the theory of knowledge and epistemology. Nobody's saying that you can't get something by yourself, you know, correct and know something, but in isolation, outside of a community, outside of a historical context, outside of a social legal structure, university, it's extremely difficult and a bad idea. So even in a secular sense, we understand in order to provide kind of a more robust ability to grasp and know things, we don't lean on our own understandings. It's a whole fabric of layers of kind of authority, culture, and history that we rely on. But somehow when it comes to religion, when we're Protestants, it's like, well, no, I've got just me and the Bible. That's all I need to...
The term I coined many years ago was goosebump veritology. You know, oh, I have goosebumps, it must be true.
That's right. And so the other thing, too, that Protestants often don't get is that even if you get the interpretation correct, well, you'd say you get the correct doctrine, is your understanding and knowing that normatively binding upon any people? Is there any normative? So even in ecclesiology, of kind of more sophisticated ecclesiologies of Anglicanism and Lutheranism, none of them admit that their interpretation of grasso doctrine is normatively binding upon all people.
Because it's sola scriptura.
It's sola scriptura.
That's the only thing binding.
Yeah, it's your own conscience binding not upon anybody else, but upon yourself. That is a big deal. So there's a sort of surrender, because Protestants will always be like, well, you're stuck in the same thing. You have to interpret through, that's, through your own lenses. Whether the church, because what if, like, you have heretics and heretical bishops, but that's a red herring. Because what the real issue is a normative issue. That, first of all, that structure provides epistemologically, so that we can know things, a much better way of guarantee that we can know stuff than by yourself. But second of all, it answers the normative question that, look, my interpretation, my knowing something is not normatively binding. I need an ecclesiological body that's normatively binding. It's connected to God.
And really, it's found right there in the New Testament. We had Christ passing on the authority to determine and disseminate truth.
That's right.
To a select group of people. And he said, and I will send my spirit.
Yeah.
And it was a physical, actual, real group. And he said, you can trust them.
Yeah.
And then those people appointed bishops and said, you can trust them.
That's right.
And so if we are to listen to Christ, we trust the apostles.
All authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Like, it's authority. Authority is binding normatively.
Yeah. And so when they passed it to the bishops, and they passed it to bishops, and then the argument becomes, yes, but what if bishops, are wrong? Well, yes, we've had many bishops that were wrong about many things. But he never said, contrary to Catholic doctrine, listen to one person.
Right.
He didn't say, I'm going to send the Spirit to one person. He said, I'm going to send it
collegially.
Yes. And so we look for that universal consensus. That's what tells us. And if one voice comes up in opposition to the sum of all voices before it, and I've often put this challenge forth to some, to many of my Protestant friends, show me one person who had all the basics correct in this faith between 100 and 1500 AD. One. And there are none. And it's like, how does that happen? Because this is where Christ said I'm supposed to look, is at this church. I'm looking at the church, and you're telling me from 100 to 1500, nobody had all the basics correct? How is that even possible?
Yeah. And also gives us a sort of mechanism that when you do get error, if you have a kind of considering collegial ecclesiology in which the fullness of the church presides in the universalness of the bishops, each and every one of them, then if one gets infected, you can cut it off without so there's a mechanism that we
have. And even if
so
just one part of one teaches is wrong, we can cut that out.
Yeah. So that the whole thing.
We have Gregory of
become
Nyssa
infected.
that we all listen to and love. And he was wrong about some things, fine. We cut that out and say, yeah, that doesn't fit. The rest, yes.
That's right. So, yeah, I think these are all great points. And again, so that's my story of my conversion. And but that's really just the beginning of God's work, is that we finally came into the church.
Next time we get together, and the Deacon and I are going, because we have these similar backgrounds, we're going to do some more videos. And we're going to discuss next time some of the fundamental difference, even though we touched on it, we'll go a little deeper into it, in the ethos between, being careful that, when people listen to this video, there are times that the term Protestant was probably used when it really should have been Western evangelical and not Protestant. So it's just kind of a loose term that wasn't used with, a careful eye of precision. But we're going to go into maybe how some of that ethos plays out very differently, and how even if doctrinally something isn't, quote, heretical, it's still other.
Yeah.
It's still heterodox. It doesn't fit with the Orthodox faith, and you can see it in the spirit and in the flavor and in the smell, and kind of we'll talk about the development of some of those different flavors and how they differ.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.